Hi there, so this is a quick introduction to slicing and supporting models for printing with devices that use the ChituBox software. So that's devices like the Creality LD002RH, the Elegoo Saturn, the ePax minis, all kinds of things like that. So all the value proposition resin printers, so otherwise called MSLA printers, masked SLA. So they use an LCD to pass UV light through to a layer of resin, and they build it up layer by layer. So this is a bit of a workflow thing to get good models, to make sure you don't have fouled prints. So you're going to need two pieces of software. So the first one is called PrusaSlicer. So that's on prusa3d.com. Just go to download the latest version, and we'll be using that to orientate and support our models. The second piece of software you need is ChituBox. So go to ChituBox.com, download the free version. You can't actually get the paid version at the moment, they're working on that. And that we will be using that to actually slice the model and put it onto a pen drive for printing on our printer. So let's get to it. So the first thing you're going to need if you're going to print something is a model. So I'll show you an example. This is my manufacturing models. These are the little miniature figurines used for like wargaming. So you can see things. I don't think we'll use the cleric. I think we'll use the example of the captain, because I think that's got a good sword that's good to demonstrate. Yeah, so that's going to be quite tricky to support properly to make sure we don't get fouled prints. If you imagine the prints print upside down on a resin printer, so the bed is at the top and it lifts up, other than otherwise from an FDM printer where the bed is at the bottom and it prints from the bottom upwards layer by layer. So I'll show you what we can do. So I've already got PrusaSlicer installed, so I'm going to go to here. I've got it installed, so I'll open that so you can see that. And what you'll be faced with is a bed. If you're using a whatever printer you're using, you just need to first go into printer settings, then go into set bed shape, and set the size. So I'm using a Saturn, so it's 192 millimeters by 120 millimeters wide. It can print up to 200 millimeters high, but we don't really worry about that at the moment. You don't need to worry about all the other printer settings because we're not actually slicing in this software, we're only using it for model support and generation. So there's one other thing that you need to do in order to make sure these supports work properly. Go into print settings, go to supports, and change support pillar connection mode to make sure it's dynamic, and then the critical angle here, make sure it says 45 degrees. What that does, it produces a nice bevel for the supports that touch the bed, so you can actually get your scraper in underneath that to pop it off the build plate and make sure you don't damage your print. So that's all we need there. So if you go to the platter, we can grab our model and then you literally just drag and paste it. Drag and drop it in. You can go to File, Open, Project. You can do it that way, but drag and drop's that fine. So it defaults, standing upright. That would not print very well. You're going to have a lot of overhangs, and you'll get bits trying to print in midair. You'll have a print failure. And what you're trying to do with SLA printing is trying to reduce the cross-sectional area that's in contact with the bed at any one point. This reduces the amount of suction forces on the bed, so it can actually peel each layer off the bed, off the screen successfully. So this is why I use PrusaSlicer. It's brilliant. So you go right click on the model, go optimize orientation, let it think for a bit, because what it's doing, it's analyzing the models, seeing all what points are sticking out and what's going to be the best orientation for that model. So give it 10-15 seconds. There we go, that's great. So that looks like a really nice way to lay that model. If you think about the cross-sectional areas, it's going to be quite good. This is going to be nicely printed, so it's not too much, and it's printing this first. But and you can drag the model around. But what I like to do is just make sure it's centered on the build plate, which I think you can mess around with that anyway. If you want to change the scale, you can make it bigger or smaller. That's great. You can just do it on the model at this point. You can rotate it if you think the rotation is not quite right. You don't really need to worry about that. We're not going to talk about this. You can cut, so you can print half a model. You can mess around with all these settings, but we're just concentrating on how to support a model at this point. So click the model, click supports. Now, really cool thing about this as well, its auto-generated supports are really, really good in PrusaSlicer. A lot better than they are on the auto supports in ChituBox, which is why we're using this workflow. So click supports, then click auto-generate points. And it'll go away and think about where all these supports need to go. There you go, so that supported that quite nicely. Now, it doesn't always get it right, but that looks pretty good to me. The only slight thing I'm concerned about is the sword, because it's quite thin. So if it's trying to peel this surface away all the time, it might bend the sword. It might start curling that way as it starts getting to the thin end. So what you can do, you can either increase the support density. So go that, which hasn't actually added anything in that case. 100% seems to work quite well. But you can actually manually add some supports as well. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go into manual editing. You can see where all the existing support connections are. I'm just using the left mouse button to rotate. It's general 3D movements and stuff. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go up to the sword and I'm going to just add some support points. It's on the bottom, so when you pull these supports off your print, they shouldn't be too visible. They should clean up quite nicely. So you can see I've got my supports there. You click apply changes and there you go. It's put some support points in. I think that would be okay. I've no concerns about this printing. This is okay because it's going to print from here that way effectively. It's going to print upside down like that. So if you kind of reverse your model, it's a bit easy to get your head around. So when it's printing this, these layers are still attached to the previous layers and those layers. So I'm looking for anything that's maybe going to try and print in thin air, which isn't. So that's supported. It only needs one support because it's quite a beefy thing. Yeah, everything looks okay to me. You'll pick this up in experience, but I'll show you something in ChituBox that you can check. Now, you normally click slice and export it to your printer, but PrusaSlicer can't do that. You can't export ChituBox files that we need for our printers. So what we're going to do, we're just going to go File, Export, Export Plate, including support. So what it's basically going to do, it's going to create a whole new model with the supports in. So I'm going to do that. Now I'm not going to overwrite the previous file because I want to keep that model. So I'm going to just call it Ink Supports. Okay, save that, done. So we'll close PrusaSlicer because we've finished with that now. We'll close that, get that out of the way. And so if I open this model now, you can see this model, when it opens, now has all the supports built in. So that's really good. So what we're going to do now, we're going to open ChituBox. I'll show you that. That's the previous one I'll do, get rid of that. So what I want to show you is how to set your machine up in ChituBox as well. It's really easy. So we'll just get rid of these. So if this is my current machine, Elegoo Saturn, but really easy to add a new printer. So I'm going to go there. You can pick all your ChituBox supported printers. So you can see you got Frozen, Peoples, you know, EPACs, Elegoos. We'll go for Creality LD002R. That's the machine we're focusing on for this one. Click that. That's your right printer. Click OK. And then you've got your screen resolutions all set up and your build plates all set up. So that's really nice. You've got a default resin profile. So you can put your own values in here. What this is used for is used to give you an estimation of the cost of your print. So how much resin it's going to use, so you can make sure you've got enough in the vat, and also the cost of it. So you can, it's good if you're going to print something for someone else, you can tell them how much it's actually going to cost. Then you've got your resin settings. I find these a little high default. So what I normally do, I change this to 7. Maybe I'll change that to a little bit more, because that makes sure you get a really good adhesion to your build plate. I find these settings a little high. So this is how fast it lifts the plate off the base, off the screen when it's trying to separate each layer. If it's too fast, it can, there's a fight between it sticking to the build plate and it sticking to the screen. And very often if the lift speed is too high, the build plate loses that fight and it sticks to the screen, and then you've got a failed print. You've just got a big mess of cured resin on the screen rather than on the build plate where you want it to be. So I typically lower this to say 45 and this to just a little notch to 60. you can play around with these settings. Different printers have different settings. Also, different resins have different settings. So if you're using something like an engineering resin like Tech Blue, you'd probably want a bit higher exposure time, a bit more lift distance to let the resin flow back in, and probably even lower lift speeds as well. But what this does, if you increase your exposure time and lower your lift speeds, you extend the length that the print lasts, you know, how long the print takes. It's a trade-off between speed and detail, and, you know, make sure you don't have a failed print. Different printers, so if you're going to get a mono screen printer, which means it hasn't got colour LCD, it's just got black and white LCD to block the UV light, they're even lower. So I'll show you an example of that. So if I add the LD002H, which is the mono version of the 2R, you can see the exposure times are only 2 seconds per layer, and the bottom exposure is a lot less. However, they've also lowered the lift speed, so I think they've figured out that the lift speeds were a bit too high on the other printer, and they've lowered them, so that's similar to what I use. So you can see the idea on that. So yeah, you can have multiple printers set up with different profiles. You can also create extra resin profiles, so you don't have to just stick with one. You can just use, you know, loads of different resin profiles. So if you can have one for your tech resins and one for different. If you use black resin, that needs a lot longer exposure time because it doesn't absorb light as easy. So you might even need like up to 10 seconds exposure on those on the 2R printer. So you can play around with it. Join one of the user groups. They have spreadsheets showing you the recommended settings for each type of resin. But generally, this will do 90% of everything you print. If you get a failed print and you think, oh, that probably didn't cure enough, you can just bump up your exposure time or lower your lift speed. Find your sweet spots as well. Sometimes if it's a bit cold in the room, you might need a bit more exposure time and a bit less lift speed. If it's in a very warm, you know, the ideal temperature is like 25 to 30 degrees. So if it's near a radiator, you can probably even drop these a bit. Again, just play with them. So we'll just leave that for now. We're not actually going to send it to the printer, so it doesn't really matter. I just want to show you how to set the prints up ready to go. So again, what we do, we just grab our model. So we're going to grab the ink supports this time, drag it across, and there you go. So you've got all the general move, rotate functions in here. I always try and make sure it's in the middle of the bed. I also try and make sure it's not printing that way. So I'm going to just rotate it a little bit and just do that. So it's running lengthwise with the bed. That seems to give you better responses. If you can print in the center, it's better. You can also duplicate this. So I could fit 2 of these on the bed and I could print them both at the same time. It doesn't actually increase your print time either, because on SLA printers, it prints the whole layer at the same time. So it doesn't matter how much you've got on each layer. It's the height that determines the build time. So I could maybe even squeeze 3 on these and it's still printing exactly the same time. Use more resin obviously, but it wouldn't increase your build time. So it's great for doing minis and wargaming minis and things like that. Excellent stuff. What I wouldn't do, once I've added supports, I would not scale it up or down to change the size of it, because it will also change the scale of the supports. If I scaled it up, the supports would become correspondingly larger and they'd be harder to remove from the model, and therefore you would impact the surface finish of your model. If I scaled it down, the supports would be too thin and I would then probably get a failed print, because the supports would not be able to support the print effectively. So once I pre-supported it in PrusaSlicer, I would not scale it in ChituBox. But I'd rotate it, duplicate it and all that kind of stuff. That's fine. So a good way to check if you've got your supports right is just up here in the right hand corner, click this icon which is the support settings. Now I'm not going to support it, and you notice it's defaulted, it's lifted it up as though it wants its own settings. Because I'm not going to use default ChituBox settings, just change this to 0, the Z lift height, and it brings it back onto the base. Now what you're looking for dark areas. That includes it, shows it needs to be supported. Now this bottom bit doesn't matter because it's on the base, so it's kind of pre-supported by the base, so you don't need to worry about that. But you can see some other dark red areas that might need an extra support or two. The sword is supported. You can see it's got this red line here, but because I've got these supports, that's going to be coping with. These little bits here don't matter because they're not large surface areas. But I can see the back might need an extra couple of bits. No, actually, it's probably not too bad. What I'm probably going to do, I'm probably just going to click in here and click See, you can't always get a support in because it needs a clear space to the base. So I think that will actually print okay. If I wanted to add an extra support in, say on head, if I click there, see it's drawn a support down, that's fine. I can always remove that. I can click delete support, find this support and click delete on the keyboard and it's gone. So there you go. So you can add supports. You could do medium support, light support. So if I click that one, that's really thin. If I click heavy, I'm trying to find a point where I can support it. See how thick that is. Now it'd be a great support, but where it contacts the actual objects, the print model, it's going to leave a really big scar when you remove that report. So I generally just, if I'm just adding a couple of supports, I might just do medium or light. If I'm doing a big, say, geometrical shape like a square, a circle, or a triangle, something that's functional, I might use heavier supports on that. But generally, the default supports in PrusaSlicer are okay, and I find it very, very rare that I need to add an extra support in ChituBox. But it's there if you need it. Say you had a print failure and you think, oh, that bit snapped off. I'll rerun it again with an extra support there. That's fine. And then all you do, when you finish that, click back on the model. You click slice. Slice. And it goes through. What it's doing is calculating the model. It's doing it layer by layer, trying to figure out what code it needs for the printer to work on. There you go. So that's finished. So it says this model is going to use just under 4 mil of resin. It's going to weigh just over 4 grams. And it's going to cost 12 cents because we didn't change that pound sign in the settings. It's going to take 2.5 hours. So that's not bad. And if you run through here, you can see these. It's doing layer by layer, so you can see this is what the screen will actually see. So this will be the UV light that's curing the resin. You can see it slicing the model on the left. So that's what we say by slicing. It's turning the models into slices of code that the printer then uses to figure out what it actually needs to print. So that's it. So you just click save, and it save it as a CTB file. That's a ChituBox file. Put that on your USB drive. Plug the USB drive into your printer. Click print and you're good to go. I'm not going to save it because I'm not going to print it. Okay, so that's it for a quick introduction to my workflow of how I found to get good reliable prints off of these value resin printers. Stay with me because I'm just going to do a quick run through on the physical Creality LD002R printer, so you can see the actual mechanics of the printer and how I set that up. Thank you for watching, and I'll speak to you soon. Hey there, so this is a quick walkthrough of the Creality LD002R printer. This is going to be similar for a lot of other printers, so I'll just show you the key components. You'll have to bear with me because I'm using a GoPro, so this might get a bit wobbly at times, but I'll try and show you everything in detail. So the first thing I'm going to do is show you the printer. So generally just plugs in at the back with a normal kettle lead. You've got your power button on the front. You've got this lid. I put this handle on so it makes it nice and easy. So when you've got resin all over your hands, there's a cat trying to say hello. So this comes off. So the two components are, you've got your build vat and your build plate. Hello cat. Hello. Right, so important things to note. If this has got resin on, don't take your build plate off. If you take your your build vat. If you take your build vat off, you're going to get underneath resin on the screen. If that cures, that's a nightmare. So if you're going to take this out, make sure this is dry. Wipe it off with a bit of kitchen towel and clean it. So to take that off, you just undo that. Pulls off. That's your build plate at the bottom. So it's a slot. Goes back on. Screws on. So to take your build vat out, if you want to clean it up, I've done these up way too tight. There you go. So they just unscrew like so, and then you can lift this off. So that's your LCD screen. You want to protect that. Make sure you don't get anything else. This is your build vat. It's got a VEP in the middle. Don't worry about the little creases. That's entirely normal. You notice though it's flush. So if you put that down, you possibly scratch this. But what I've done, I printed some rather cool things out. So if I go into my accessories box, one of the first things I've got is this. It's a VAT protector. So I printed this off on my my V8 on my FDM printer. So now I can take that out and I can put that in. If I wanted to store it, you need to protect any resin in there from the sun. So you've got these little covers on. If you undo that screw, this sits down. So basically it sits like that. This is the spare vat you've got. So if you want to have two resins on the go, maybe grey and coloured, you can switch them in and out. So that's really easy. So that's it really. So what you do, you put that in, make sure it's screwed down, otherwise you're going to get some horrible prints. Don't screw it down too tight like I did before. So just so you feel them snug. So, and that's it basically. When you switch it on, it comes on, you're going to get it powering up. The Crealities have a weird bug where half the screen sometimes doesn't light up. Why have I've done that out way too tight again. So I'll show you how to get around that bug. If only half the screen works, obviously you're going to have your prints split in half. So I'm going to take that out. So when you switch it on, go to System, sorry, not System, go to Tool, go to Calibrate, and click Next. What it does, it draws a screen. So what you're looking for is this rectangle. If you've only got the bottom half or the top half, switch your printer off and on again, and it should be fine. So just to go back through that again, you cancel that. So from your menu, you go Tool, Calibrate, Next, and it will draw half a screen. If that works, you're good to go. So you can cancel out of that, put your vat back on with your resin in, and you should be good to print. And I'm not going to do this up that tight this time. Okay, there you go. If you want to start a print, what you can do, you can go to this menu here, click Print. This is where all your files will be. You plug your USB in at the side and you'll just have your files. You click on a file and then it will come up with a little play button and you press print and you're good to go, and then it will start. Put the lid back on, just watch it. That'll be really cool. There's nothing really anything else. You can ignore everything else. If you wanted to move the build plate, you can press down. It moves. So say your print finishes and it's a bit too close and you just want to move your build plate up, or you want to do some work in here, you can just do it up and down on that, and you can do increments. You can micro step it. That's pretty much it. If you press home, what that's going to do is going to take the build plate and do a test and take it to home. Shouldn't really need to do that. It's got cat fur in it already, so you'll have to check that when you start setting it up. I'm going to stop that because it's boring watching that. But that's it really. So yeah, there's one thing you can do when you get these prints. This build plate has to be exactly level to that. I've already yeah, so it needs to be perfectly flat to the screen. Otherwise, if it's slightly off, you get some side of the print's not sticking and you'll get print failures. I've already leveled this, so I'm not going to do it again. But the way you do it is, if you ever needed to, or you got a new printer, you undo these 4 screws. You can see actually, you can see the slots where the screws are. So this build plate will then be loose, and you click home, and it will come down, and then it will be level. But this plate, because it's loose, will be perfectly touching. You just press down on with one hand on it when it's homed, and then you tighten all the bolts up. And what that does, that makes sure it's level. There's loads of things on YouTube how to level it. Some people do it without the vat in and then use a piece of A4 paper, but this FEP is exactly the size of an A4 paper, so leveling to the FEP is perfectly okay as well. But it's just some people's preferences, but this works for me. I've never had a print failure on this. That's not been my fault. That's it. That's your little charcoal filter. So that's running now, and that's what that does. When the lid's on, it's drawing air through there and it's taking the fumes out, so you know it gets less stinky. That's basically it for the print and how to run it and get it set up. Yeah, so you've got 2 vats, as I say, so you can have 2 lots of resin going. So if you want to swap colour, you can put the other vat straight in. This one probably needs a new FEP fitting, but I'll link a video into that as well. I'll leave that for you to do because it's good practice. In here you've got your instruction manuals, but you've also got extra FEP films. It's worth buying a pack of those, but I think you've got 3 in there. so that's good. You've got your scraper that I've sharpened a little bit, so that's for getting the things off the build plate. Loads of things on YouTube for that. Allen keys for it. You've got a measuring cup and some gloves. This is quite cool. I printed this off. So when you finish printing, bearing in mind this will have resin on, so you will want to use gloves at this point. And I'm doing this one-handed because I've got a camera. You take that off. You wouldn't put it on the table. You slot that on. Tighten that up, and then that will slide on like that. What that does, that just leave that for 5 minutes, and what this does, all the resin should hopefully drain off, so you're not wasting any resin, because obviously any resin you wipe off with a kitchen towel goes in the bin. It's not cheap stuff, so try and get as much of it back in there as possible. Then when you're ready to wash it, take that off, pop your model off the build plate, pop that through your wash and cure, and then pop that back in the box. Talking of the wash and cure, I've also printed an extra thing off for you. So this, with the bolt on your wash and cure, goes on the back of the wash and cure, and then your build plate slides onto there and tightens that up. So you can actually put the whole build plate in the wash and cure. Say you've got a big part, or it's not coming off, and you just want to get it cleaned up, that's fine. If you get a print failure, what you're going to want to use is use this plastic spatula to scrape the bottom of the vat to get off any cured resin. Don't scrape too hard, don't use the corners, use it flat. So go through slowly and you'll feel the little bits of resin that are stuck and failed on the FEP, and then you can do that and drain it. Sometimes it's worth taking the vat out, using a drainer to pull it back into the resin bottle and filter out all the little bits of stuck resin. But again, loads of stuff on YouTube about that, that's fine. What's that? Oh, these are the filters, so you can use these with a funnel to actually filter that resin out like I was just talking about. You've got a paintbrush, so if you take apart and it's really intricate and detailed, you can use this brush with some IPA to get in all the nooks and crannies. Sometimes your wash and cure won't get into the little gaps because it needs turbulence, so you can just finish it off with this brush. That's the original filter on that fan, but you don't need it anymore, but I've included it. That's a spare LCD screen. Now, because these use masking SLA, so what it does, it uses a UV screen to block parts of the UV light, so it only lets the UV light through for the bits you want to cure. Because it's UV, it degrades the UV screens, so you generally only get about 200 hours off a print. That's on its second screen. They're really easy to change. There are loads of bits on YouTube on how to change them, but that's, that's 25 quid there. Treat it as a consumable. Always have one spare in your box, but you've got a spare all ready to go. So when this one, if this one does go, sometimes they last for 500 hours, you get lucky. But as soon as that one goes and you put this one in, just order another one of these and you'll be good to go. And I think that pretty much covers all the accessories. I say I've included most stuff. You got an extra vat, that's 25 quid there as well. So it's got quite a lot of nice accessories to it, and these printed accessories should do you really well. So any questions, hit me up and I'll see what I can answer. Speak to you later.